A herdsman from the southern deserts stands in the northern sanctuary of Bethel, his rough wool cloak entirely out of place against the polished limestone. Most people read this passage and assume the problem was sincerity. We assume the Israelites were just going through the motions. We think God is. To be at Tzaddik was to be the gravity that held the broken pieces of the community together. Righteousness is not a private spiritual condition. It is a social canopy. Listen to the rhythm of how Job describes his own life in chapter 29. When his honor was still intact, I put on righteousness as my clothing. Justice was my robe and my turban. He was eyes to the blind when they could not find the road. He was feet to the lame when they could not carry their own weight. He was a father to the needy when the system abandoned them. He took up the legal case of the stranger who had no voice in the courts. He literally broke the fangs of the wicked and snatched the bleeding victims from their teeth. That is Tzedek. That is Mishpat. The two words woven together into a single garment. A life that actively hunts down injustice and replaces it with divine equity. Job understood the architecture of God's character perfectly. But today, that architecture is fractured. We are staring at a modern religious landscape paralyzed by a choice the Bible never offered. You walk into a modern church building on a Sunday morning. You sit in a polished wooden pew. You hold a crisp paper bulletin in your hand, angry because they were hypocrites who harbored secret, private sins while pretending to be holy in public. But that is not what Amos says. You listen to the sermon echoing through the speakers, and you are immediately forced to make a choice. You look to one side of the cultural divide. You see personal piety. You see closed eyes. You hear fervent prayers. You find a relentless focus on private morality. You find a deep, protective reverence for the biblical text. You see clean hands and pure hearts. But you look at the city outside. The poor are being crushed by debt. The marginalized are weeping in the cold. The economic systems are rigged. And the sanctuary doors are locked tight. The river of justice is completely dry. You look to the other side of the divide. You see social activism. You see damp cardboard protest signs. You hear loud chants for equality echoing off concrete sidewalks. You find busy food pantries. You find crowded homeless shelters. You see calloused hands doing the heavy work of mercy. But you look at the interior life. The prayers are hollow. The ancient scriptures are treated like disposable suggestions. The pursuit of personal holiness is abandoned. The altar has been torn down. You are asked to pick a side. You are told to choose between the altar and the street. You are handed a fractured, broken gospel. We have taken the unified character of God and torn it in two. We treat piety and activism like competing political platforms. If you look closer at his indictment, Amos does not mention their private, interior lives. He points to the courthouse gate, where the poor are. We act like feeding a starving family is a distraction from preaching the gospel. We act like weeping over personal sin is a distraction from systemic change. We build a thick wall between the spirit and the body. And we force you to choose where you want to live. This is not a difference in theology. It is a mutilation of the text. If you have ever felt this agonizing tension, you are not crazy. Your body is carrying a biblical intuition. You are sensing the ghost of a unified truth. You are craving the ancient, unbroken architecture of Tzedek. Because when you read the prophets, God absolutely refuses to choose. He demands both. He demands the pure heart and the open hand. He demands the flawless sacrifice and the harvested corners of the field. He wants a people who fast for their own sins and who literally break the iron chains of the oppressed. To separate them is to destroy them both. Piety without justice is a religious country club. Justice without piety is just secular humanism wearing a cross necklace. You cannot split the river. But the ultimate proof of this unbroken unity does not come from a prophet yelling in Bethel. It does not come from Job sitting in the ashes. It comes from a brutal execution site outside the walls of Jerusalem, where the two halves of God's character crash together in a way no one saw coming, forced to pay bribes just to be heard. He points to the marketplace, where merchants are using rigged scales to sell swept-up wheat to the starving. A Roman execution detail stands on a rocky, limestone hill outside the city walls. The iron hammer strikes. The heavy, rough-hewn crossbeam is hoisted into the air, dropping into its socket with a sickening thud. The sky above Jerusalem turns unnaturally black at midday. You can hear the gasping, ragged breath of a man, suffocating under the weight of his own body. The smell of sweat, copper blood, and cheap wine hangs in the humid air. This is Jesus of Nazareth. But if you look at this execution through the lens of a Western mind, you will only see half of what is actually happening. When modern believers look at the cross, we almost always put it in bucket one. We view the crucifixion entirely through the lens of personal piety and individual salvation. We see a spiritual mechanism designed to erase our private, secret sins, completely divorced from the suffering of the world on the ground. But Jesus did not die as a Greek philosopher. He died as the ultimate Hebrew tzaddik. He is the man who perfectly embodied the unbroken unity of God's character. He points to the fact that while the temple altar is piled high with expensive meat, the stone streets outside are filled with the shivering. He is the one who touched the bleeding sores of the leper, fed the starving crowds on the hillside, and turned over the rigged financial tables of the wealthy elite in the temple courtyard. He lived a life where the sanctuary and the street were the exact same place. And on this splintered wood, the two pillars of the universe crashed together. The cross is not a private transaction. It is a cosmic intervention. God is executing his mishpat, the judgment against human corruption, against every rigged scale, every bribe taken at the city gate, every ignored widow, and every private act of malice finally falls. The gavel of divine justice comes down with absolute, crushing force upon his own shoulders. He takes the violence of the oppressor and the suffering of the oppressed into his own lungs. But the purpose of the gavel is to restore the standard. The blood dripping onto the dust is the ultimate tzedek. He is rebuilding the social and spiritual canopy. He is re-establishing absolute equity, tearing down the wall of hostility between humanity and the divine, and between human and neighbor. As he breathes his last, the thick curtain inside the temple, the barrier separating the holy presence from the common street, literally tears. Bodies of debtors who had their cloaks taken as collateral. The people of Bethel had done something that modern believers do every single day. In half, from top to bottom, the sanctuary spills out into the dirt. The vertical line and the horizontal line are permanently welded together in his torn flesh. He proves that you cannot love the God you cannot see if you are actively ignoring the neighbor you can see. But what happens to you right now when you realize you have been trying to live out a fractured faith? A herdsman walks into a royal sanctuary filled with the smoke of expensive sacrifices and shatters the illusion of a private religion. A wealthy farmer leaves the edges of his wheat field untouched in the sun and turns his harvest into divine equity. A prophet pairs two words like a roaring wadi and locks the sanctuary to the street forever. A ruined man covered in ashes points to an open table and proves that a spotless life is defined by who you feed. A modern church stares at a fractured, divided gospel and craves a truth that refuses to choose. A heavy iron gavel falls on a splintered crossbeam and absorbs the violence of every broken scale and every rigged court. A torn temple curtain falls to the stone floor, and the holy presence of God spills out into the dust of the city. They believed religion was a vertical line. They believed that if your vertical line with God was straight, if your prayers were sincere and your sacrifices, one standard, one unbroken line. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the edges of that dirt field. I keep thinking about the calloused hands of the farmer reaching down for the fallen bundle of golden wheat, and then stopping. Not because he felt a sudden wave of philanthropic pity, but because he realized that the wheat in the dirt did not belong to him anymore. It belonged to the widow, watching from the road. The realization that human goodness is not measured by how tightly we protect our own purity, but by what we refuse to take from the vulnerable. If you are in a season where your faith feels like a hollow, isolated, routine, If you are exhausted by a culture that forces you to choose between the quiet reverence of the prayer closet and the loud, messy work of the pavement, that you do not have to choose. God is not asking you to split your soul in half. The altar was never meant to be a hiding place from the world. Your private devotion is supposed to be the engine for your public mercy. If this restored something broken in your understanding of the text, subscribe and leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is tired of a divided religion. And pray for us as we keep digging into these ancient words. You were expensive, then you were righteous. Regardless of what was happening on the horizontal line with your neighbor, they had taken the unified character of God, and may the God who refused to separate his altar from his streets give you the courage to walk out of the sanctuary, find the edges of the field, and let his justice roll through your hands like an unstoppable river, and split it perfectly in half. We still do this. In English, we even have two separate vocabularies for it. When we talk about personal purity, prayer, and avoiding sin, we call it righteousness. When we talk about defending the vulnerable, fixing systemic corruption, and feeding the hungry, we call it justice and gold of the royal temple. The air is thick with the smell of roasting fat and burning frankincense. You can hear the plucked strings. We treat them like two different departments of the Christian life. You can major in one and ignore the other. But the ancient Hebrews did not have two realities. Righteousness is not a private moral status. It is a public architecture. To feel the weight of what Amos is actually screaming at the crowd, and to understand why God would categorically reject a flawless worship service, you have to step out of English and into the language of the text itself. You have to look at a concept that, once seen, changes how you read every prophet, every psalm, and every word of Jesus. The detail that changes everything is hiding in plain sight, right there in the black ink and thin paper of your English Bible. When you read the scriptures in English, you are reading a text that has been filtered through a Greco-Roman mind. Western civilization loves categories. The Greeks gave us the philosophical divide between the pure, lofty realm of the spirit and the dirty, corrupted realm of physical matter. The Romans gave us the cold, calculated scales of civic law. We love to put things in separate boxes, label them, and keep them perfectly distinct. The spiritual goes in one box. The physical goes in another. The private life goes on the left. The public life goes on the right. And over centuries of translating these ancient texts into Latin, German, and eventually English, we created two entirely different buckets for human goodness, of 10-stringed harps echoing off the walls, accompanying choirs that sing perfectly pitched psalms of praise. It is a religious masterpiece. Bucket 1 is righteousness. When you hear that word, your mind immediately paints a very specific, isolated picture. You picture a solitary figure. You picture folded hands, a quiet room, bowed heads, closed doors. Righteousness feels internal. It feels like sexual purity, clean language, private devotion, and the disciplined avoidance of sin. It is the metric of how clean your hands are when you lift them in the air during a worship song. Bucket 2 is justice. When you hear that word, the imagery shifts completely. You do not picture a church, you picture a courtroom. You hear the sharp crack of a wooden gavel against a mahogany desk. You see protesters holding damp cardboard signs on a concrete sidewalk, or a lawyer slamming a heavy stack of documents onto a table. Justice feels external. It is about legislation, economics, systemic fairness, and defending the marginalized. In the modern West, you can choose your bucket. Some communities preach a gospel of pure righteousness. They focus entirely on personal salvation and private morality, perfectly content to ignore the fact that the city around them is starving or corrupt. Other communities preach a gospel of pure justice. They organize food drives, draft legislation, and protest unfair labor laws, while treating personal holiness and private devotion as outdated. irrelevant relics. We built a thick, impenetrable wall between the sanctuary and the street. But the ancient Hebrew authors did not even know that wall existed. The year is roughly 750 BC. The elite of Israel are experiencing an economic golden age. They sleep on beds inlaid with ivory. The split is not a biblical reality. It is an optical illusion created by our language. To the prophets, to King David, and to Jesus himself, dividing personal holiness from social justice would be like trying to divide wet from water. You cannot have one without the other. In the language they spoke, these were not two different concepts competing for your attention. They were two expressions of the exact same root. To see how this actually works on the ground, you have to leave the dictionary and walk out into a dirt field at the edge of town. The sun beats down on the Judean hills. Sweat stings a farmer's eyes. The curved iron sickle swings. Golden wheat falls to the dry, cracked earth. He gathers the stalks. He binds them into tight sheaves. He loads the wooden carts to beat the coming rain, but a bundle slips from his calloused fingers. It hits the dust. He naturally reaches down to pick it up. The law of Moses says stop. Leave it. Leave the corners of the field untouched. Leave the fallen grapes on the vineyard floor. Leave the beaten olives in the high branches. Do not turn back. Do not strip the vines bare. Do not maximize your profit margins. Because a widow is walking behind you, an orphan is watching from the road. A foreigner with no ancestral land is waiting at the edge of your property. They drink wine by the bowlful, and they use their wealth to fund the most spectacular, extravagant worship services the Northern Kingdom has ever seen. In the modern world, if a wealthy landowner gives his surplus to the starving, we call it philanthropy. We call it charity. We view it as a generous add-on to an already moral life, an extra credit assignment for the exceptionally religious. But in the biblical framework, leaving the edges of the field is not an act of charity. It is the baseline of righteousness. If that farmer sings every psalm perfectly on the Sabbath, if he sacrifices his absolute best lamb at the temple altar, if he prays 3 times a day and never utters a profane word, but he harvests his field to the bare edges and leaves nothing for the poor, he is unrighteous. He is wicked. His vertical line with God is broken because his horizontal line with the widow is severed. In the Hebrew mind, everything belongs to God. The land, the rain, the seed, the harvest. The farmer is just managing it, and God has strictly mandated that a portion of his harvest belongs directly to the vulnerable. To harvest the corners of the field is not just being greedy. It is stealing from the poor what God has already deeded to them. This was the daily, gritty reality of the ancient Israelites. Righteousness was never an abstract theological status. It was bread in the mouth of a starving neighbor. The people packing this courtyard are not atheists. They are not pagans. They are Sabbath-keeping, tithe-paying, temple-attending believers. And the herdsman, Amos, opens his mouth. This is the worldview you have to hold in your mind when you walk back into that royal sanctuary in Bethel. Because when Amos finally delivers the climax of his message, he does not just tell them to stop singing. He tells them what must replace the music. He uses 2 specific words, and those 2 words shatter the wall between the sanctuary and the street forever. Amos looks at the crowd, at the smoking altars and the wealthy worshippers, and he delivers the crushing blow. In Amos chapter 5, verse 24, he says, "But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream." In your English Bible, those 2 words sit next to each other, like separate ideas. But in the original Hebrew, Amos is deploying a linguistic pairing, so tight that they function as a single, unified reality. The words he hurls at the priesthood are mishpat and tzedek. The word translated as justice is the Hebrew mishpat. It is a word of action. It means stepping in to correct a wrong, taking the side of the vulnerable, punishing the oppressor, and actively intervening to restore fairness. It is the gavel coming down on corruption and delivers a message from God that lands like a physical blow. He does not tell them God is pleased with their attendance. He tells, the word translated as righteousness is the Hebrew tzedek, often appearing in its feminine form, tzedakah. Its etymology is grounded in the idea of a standard, a state of absolute equity and right relationship. A society has tzedek when every single person is treated as an image bearer of the divine, regardless of their economic leverage. If feeling the weight of the original language changes how you read your Bible, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we dig past the English translation to uncover the architecture of the text. So Amos brings these two words together, and they lock perfectly into place. Tzedek is the standard. Mishpat is the action you take to restore that standard when it has been broken. You cannot have one without the other. They are a matched set, paired dozens of times across the Old Testament. In Psalm, Kahdeksson Kumentau Udekson, the poet declares that Tzedek and Mishpat are the very foundation of God's throne. They are the twin pillars holding up the universe. And Amos uses the imagery of a desert landscape to drive the point home. In the arid Middle East, most rivers are wadis dry, cracked riverbeds that only flow for a few weeks during the winter rains. They are temporary. They are unreliable. Amos tells the people that their expensive religious festivals are like a wadi. They look impressive for a moment, but they dry up the second the service ends. God does not want a temporary flash. Them God is sick to his stomach. He speaks for Yahweh and says, I despise your religious festivals. Even though you bring me of religious emotion, he wants a continuous, roaring, unstoppable river of Mishpat and Tzedek flooding the streets of the city. Worship is not a substitute for tzedek. It is supposed to be the celebration of it. If your neighbor is being crushed by the legal system, your flawless singing is an insult to the Creator. You cannot claim to be righteous while remaining passive in the face of injustice. But to see what a life of tzedek actually looks like in practice, you cannot just look at a nation. You have to turn to the oldest book in the Bible and listen to the defense of a man who lost absolutely everything. A man sits in a pile of gray ash outside the city gates. His skin is covered in black, crusted sores. The dry wind whips dust into his eyes. He holds a broken shard of rough pottery in his trembling hand, scraping the weeping flesh of his own arms to stop the unbearable itching. This is Job. 3 of his closest friends sit around him in the dirt. They are looking down at his ruined life, and they are doing the theological math. In their minds, the equation is simple. God punishes the wicked. Burnt offerings. I will not accept them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. Job is being punished. Therefore, Job must be wicked. They are absolutely convinced he is hiding a secret. Private sin. They demand that he confess. Job refuses. He looks back at his accusers. And in chapter 31, he lays out his final defense. He presents his ultimate resume of innocence to the court of heaven. He is claiming to be the tzedek, the righteous one. If a modern believer were forced to prove their absolute righteousness, they would likely talk about their private habits. They would list the inappropriate movies they never watched, the profane words they never said, the morning devotions they never missed. But look at Job's defense. Look at how an ancient Hebrew mind defined a perfect, blameless life. He does not point to his altar. He points to his table. He swears that he never ate his bread alone while the orphans starved outside his door. He swears he never saw a man shivering for lack of clothing, while his own sheep produced thick, warm wool. He swears he never ignored the legal grievance of his servants when they brought a complaint against him. He swears he never raised his hand against the fatherless at the city gate, even when he had the political power to win the case. This is the uncompromising standard Amos is holding up against the thick smoke, the beautiful music, and the expensive sacrifices, so that our vertical line with God can be perfectly straight. We treat the cross as a legal loophole that gets our souls into heaven,